and job displacement. Um, so starting off first, we have data and privacy. Should you be compensated if your personal data is being used to generate billions of dollars in profit for tech companies? Why or why not? And is this any different from unpaid labor? Charles says that you should be getting paid. So does Nee. Um, can you give an explanation as to why that is? Because it's my own data and from me doing the task on the website or service, I can agree with that. So let's look at like a real life example of this. Oh, it didn't change for a second there.
How much should you get paid?
Oh, that's a good question, actually. Yeah, depending on how much that you do put out. Um, yeah, I guess that's a good question to be posed as well. I think it kind of depends on how much that you're giving information out in regards to something like Facebook or Twitter or something like that. So let's look at Meta for an example. So Meta's entire business model is built on the premise of collecting user behavior, preferences, relationships, and habits. They then sell those habits and whatnot. Uh, they then sell those highly targeted advertising against that said data. Back in 23, Meta made about $134.9 billion in revenue. Users generate all the content and provide the data, yet receive none of the financial benefits for it. So it's pretty much they're using your data and what you put out onto the platform, and they're making all the money for it. But yet you see, as a user, you don't see any of that money. Um, Jaron Lanier, who's a tech pioneer who has argued that social media users are essentially quote unquote digital laborers who are not being compensated. In his book, Who Owns the Future, he goes into great detail about this very topic of putting yourself out there on a social media platform. Um, you yourself are personally generating so much money, but yet you're seeing none of the actual revenue from it. All right, moving on, we have AI and algorithms. Who is morally responsible when a self-driving car causes fatal accidents? Is it the engineer, the company as a whole, or the owner of the car, and why? This is kind of unfortunately, like it's a very heavy question to ask, and there's no right or wrong answer here. I would just love to get the class's perspective on topics such as this. Isol says the owner. Charles says the company. All good answers. Stephen also says the owner. Kyle says a mixture of everyone. All right answers. These are all, none of them are wrong answers to any of this. So let's look at an unfortunate reality of a situation that happened with a self-driving car in a fatal accident. Um, let's look at the case of Elaine Herzberg. So back in 2018, an Uber self-driving car killed Elaine Herzberg in Arizona. The driver, Rafaela Vasquez, who was in the vehicle watching a video as she was quote unquote driving. If it was a self-driving car, she's not really driving herself. So she wasn't paying attention to her surroundings, and she ended up fatally striking Elaine as she was crossing the road. So what's funny about this case was that the software did detect Elaine, but it kind of misclassified her. So what that means is that the vehicle itself, it caught Elaine as like a foreign object, but it didn't register her as a person, so it didn't brake fast enough, and consequently, unfortunately, she lost her life because of it. But what also makes this case kind of ethically ambiguous was that the judge and the Superior Court of Maricopa sentenced Rafaela to 3 years of supervised probation, um, and decided that the charge would be classified as a misdemeanor. Um, do you think that her sentence should have been any different? Why or why not? Because the argument here is that I'm sorry, not Elaine, Rafaela wasn't necessarily quote unquote driving the vehicle. In the same breath, though, she was in the driver's seat of the said vehicle. So it's kind of one of those iffy situations.
She was driving the car legally. It's, what is this? 2018. So this is not a true self-driving car ever.
Hmm.
Uh, I presume that was a Tesla. So whatever Tesla may be saying, certainly wasn't capable of driving at the level of, it wasn't, the very fact that there's a steering wheel tells you that it's not a self-driving vehicle.
I can agree
Uh,
with that. I think it's just one of those things of, unfortunately, like it wasn't quite perfected yet. So to call it a quote unquote self-driving vehicle did a disservice to, unfortunately, Elaine and then Rafaela in the same breath. All right, so moving on to intellectual property and open source. This one's kind of wordy, so I'll give an explanation as to what this actually means. So if a $1 trillion company builds its core product on free open source software created by volunteer unpaid developers, do they have an ethical obligation to give it back to the community, even if the license does not require it? So that's kind of wordy in a sense. So I gave an example underneath. If I were to create a huge cloud-based software from something like Mongo database, um, that makes a huge profit off of it, despite MongoDB kind of being free. Do I have an obligation to repay Mongo database even if they do not require me to pay them back? This is kind of one of those questions where, um, besides just knowing what the right thing to do is, should you do something like this? Like, should you pay back the people that came before you um, to help you get to where you are today? It would be ethically nice to repay. I can agree with that. That's a good statement to say. I think it'd be nice to repay the efforts. Very well. So let's move on to what the actual thing says. So Amazon Web Server, which I'm pretty sure everyone here knows what that is. So AWS built a massive cloud business on top of open source tools such as Elasticsearch and Mongo database, both of which were open source at the time. Eventually, both companies changed their licenses specifically to prevent Amazon from profiting off of their work without contributing back to it. Um, I don't need to go into great detail about how big Amazon is because everyone here does know how big Amazon is. Um, so with that said, this caused a huge debate in the open source community about sustainability and fairness because by that point you're kind of asking yourself what is considered open source, um, how much of quote unquote open source should I be using, things along that nature. All right, moving on to surveillance and control. If a government contracts your company to build a mass surveillance system, do you have an ethical obligation to refuse, even if it's legal and it pays well? So this is going to touch into more of the international laws in regards to ethics and computer science and whatnot. Um, but before we get to that point, I would love to hear the class's perspective on this. If a foreign government contracts your company, let's say, for instance, you have a company and they're asking you or contracting you to build a mass surveillance system, should you, and for, this, for intents of all sake and purposes, you are an American operating under American laws, do you have an ethical obligation to refuse this? I think you should have an ethical obligation to refuse. Harris says not an obligation, but would be a big no for me. Ethically, you could refuse based on your own rules. Okay, these are all good answers. I'm loving the feedback. All right, so let's move on to a real world scenario that regarded this actually. So Project Firefly. Back in 2018, it was revealed that Google was secretly developing a censored search engine for the Chinese government, codenamed Project Firefly. The system would have been blacklisting search terms such as human rights, democracy, political dissent, etc. Um, Thousands of Google employees signed a petition demanding that the project be canceled, saying that it directly violated Google's very own ethical principles. Um, I'm not going to dig too deep into Chinese laws because, frankly, I'm very ignorant of it as an American. However, this sparks so much controversy because Google, in and of itself, is an American company. The Chinese government, although it's legal to, in this case, survey your population, um, should you even do it? So that was the biggest question uh, and the biggest dilemma for that matter in regards to this project. Um, the project was later abandoned due to internal pressure alongside public backlash because of it. Not many people were very happy about the idea of Google possibly building a system where it kind of spies on civilians. So let's move on to the digital divide and access. If a life-saving technology like a medical app or emergency alert system is only available in English, have the developers acted unethically toward non-English speaking communities, whether it's intentional or not? And why or why not? Now, this sounds like kind of like a simple fix, like, oh, just change the website or whatever you're using to look at something online or something like that to your own native tongue. However, it's a lot deeper and unfortunately very harsher than that. It's not just a matter of convenience. So what do you guys think? Did those developers, whether they meant to or not, acted unethically towards non-English speaking communities? I think it may have been unethical accidentally. Yes, it's unethical if they are not making an effort to translate into every language. Some good answers, some nice
Like
feedback.
like every language on earth.
I mean, I'm assuming that's going to be very hard to do, but um, I think that's where the ethical dilemma comes into play because it kind of you start to think about which language or which population gets considered and which others don't. ISIL says unethical if they are selling it on different countries. Okay. All right, so let's move on to a real world scenario that regards this. Unfortunately, the Maui wildfires. Back in 2023, the Maui wildfires, sorry, that's a mouthful. Emergency alert systems failed to reach many of the native Hawaiian and non-English speaking residents in time, which raised serious questions about who gets considered when these systems are being designed. Um, this example is an unfortunate tragedy because it shows that digital exclusion can be a matter of life or death, not just a matter of convenience in regards to different languages. Um, I'm sure all of us here know about the Maui wildfires back when it first happened. Um, but yeah, this really it shows that just a simple click or a possible inconvenience can lead to life or death, no matter how small it may seem on the surface level. Oh, Harris says I would say top spoken. Don't know how to choose X though. Hmm. All right. So moving on to automation and job displacement. So should companies be required to publicly disclose when and how they are replacing human workers with automated systems? Or do they have the right to make those decisions in private in the name of business competition? So what this really means is should companies be required to publicly disclose if they're going to either pause or fire some people based upon AI/automation? or do they as a company have the right to keep that a secret up until the time comes? Nee says publicly. Okay. Excuse me. I think businesses should disclose it publicly. Okay. All good answers. Is there anyone here that thinks that it should be disclosed privately or not talked about at all until it actually happens? Right? Because that's the point of an ethical discussion. Legally, companies can already fire people for some reason, but morally, they should be transparent about this. Yeah, I can definitely agree with that. I can see that. And that's the issue when it comes down to ethics, is that there's no clear black and white answer. A lot of it's gray, right? So let's move on to a real world scenario that regards this very topic. We have IBM. I'm sure everyone here knows what IBM is as well. So IBM made headlines back in 2023 when CEO Arvind Krishna announced that they would pause hiring roles that could be replaced by AI, which at the time would have been about 7,800 people being eliminated through automation. Um, what made this notable was that Krishna said it openly and publicly. Um, Before then, most companies would quietly automate and let either attrition do the work, i.e., they're kind of like silently pushing them out the door. Um, IBM being transparent about the situation sparked a controversy about whether or not companies should be required to do the same. Um, and there is that. That is a real scenario about what IBM did in regards to disclosing whether or not they would be firing people or not. So before we move on, is there any questions that anyone has about everything that I just discussed?
Yeah, so suppose that, companies did disclose that this was on the last point, and A, things a little bit more nuanced, that question supposes that the company actually knows, which in many cases they really don't exactly what they're doing. But assume that they did, and so let's say everybody disclosed. What would be the upshot of that?
I mean, are you asking for my opinion, or are you asking
Yeah,
on a? Okay,
I mean, because usually it's like, oh, so should companies be disclosing something? Then fine, they're disclosing it, but what do you see as the actual benefit? I mean, presumably, if they're doing something ethically right, there is a benefit to the rest. So, what is it that is the actual gain?
if I'm just being completely transparent, my
Mhm.
personal opinion on it is you kind of know where you stand at. Um, I would rather, me personally, once again, this is not reflecting my group's opinion of it or anything, but for me, I like to know where I stand in terms of a company. So if I'm getting told you're about to be replaced by automation, I won't have to come into work smiling one day and then have to all of a sudden pack my bags on the very same day, right? So if I get
Mhm.
told I'm going to get replaced, I can use that time. I'm assuming I'm gonna get some time to before I before I get out the door. I'm going to have time to look for a job in the meantime. But that's just me though. I can't speak for everyone, but I'll rather be told up front like you're about to be replaced by automation. Here's your time frame. So because that kind of gives me time to look for jobs and to really think about moving to a different company. But that's just me though. So I can't really speak on anybody else. That's the benefit that like I see about getting told publicly.
Okay, but I mean, this is about announcement of job losses in general. That's your argument, and that's fine. It's a very practical thing. But my impression was that the issue was losses due to automation. That was the important qualifier.
Hmm,
So suppose that in both cases you have 3 months, regardless of the reason why they're firing you.
hmm.
What's the gain? I'm just trying to see how you guys think.
I can hop in here for a second
Y-
if
Yeah, dude.
By all means, yeah.
I mean, to say that in an ethical discussion, to say that they're necessary, like that a gain is necessitated, I think is almost a little bit flawed, right? Because like when looking at things through like the lens of ethics, we shouldn't necessarily be looking for necessarily gains, but limiting harm whenever possible, right? So I would argue that having, you know, huge, massive layoffs for corporate profit and being very, shady and non-transparent about it is unethical. And what is the gain? I would say the gain is the lesser of two evils.
Okay. All right. I'll let you move on. I just wanted to hear your thoughts.
I appreciate it. Is there any other questions that anyone has any questions about? I know that I'm kind of short on time now because I kind of spoke longer than I thought I was going to speak for. But if anyone has any other questions, please reach me after class. But besides that, I will pass this off to my colleague, Charles. Charles, whenever you're ready.
Thanks. Uh, if you want to move it to the next slide. Thank you. Okay. So I'm Charles. I'm doing my presentation on more of personal professional ethics that we would all be that we all may experience within our business and day-to-day lives at work and such like that. And so uh, I want to go into it just being more than just don't be evil. And so I wanted to help go into a ethical framework and decision-making thought process on how we can go about and work uh, as ethically as possible within our environment. So next slide. So first I wanted to present a couple of businesses that have been found to be going over their lines ethically. Uh, the first example would be Volkswagen, which in 2015 they had code written specifically to test conditions and cheat on emission standards. And in doing so, they were saying that their emissions were lower than they actually were. And in doing so, uh, this was providing a lot of harm to the environment by releasing more like chemicals into the air. And in doing so, they were fined like billions of dollars, and it would be coined as Dieselgate. And the other examples would be Facebook and YouTube. And so these social media and platforms designed algorithms that were helping for boosting of engagement. And in doing so, they created unhealthy attachments to them and creating addictions and such like that, and mental health crises. And also the spreading of misinformation due to them not focusing on more truth-focused information, just anything that would get clicks and such like that. And so, but I chose these three examples in particular due to the fact that these were not really accidents. These were decisions that were made either in like boardrooms or like the design processes themselves, and how they have very tangible impacts on our own day-to-day lives and our own environment and stuff like that, and our own mental well-being. And so in this day and age, it's extremely important to be ethical and to question and to think more critically about what it is exactly that we are doing and producing. And so to uh, cause as least harm as possible within the world and the lives of real people. Next slide. So um, I helped develop some core principles that we could look towards into developing a more ethical like backbone into what we should be looking out for. And so the first principle would be privacy. And so this would have to do with respecting user data, uh, making sure everything is transparent, and making sure we have the consent from our own users and those around us whenever we are making our products or decisions and such like that. And making sure that this is just for the user control and not just for data extraction and just profiting. The next principle would be fairness and just non-discrimination in general. Actively auditing for bias and algorithms and data that may end up choosing particular targets, and making sure that we don't perpetuate or amplify like inequalities that are existing within our own society. There's transparency and explainability, and this is just trying to go beyond black box systems and explain why our models are making these specific decisions and how users can understand how their data is being used in particularly. And then finally, there'd be accountability. And this is just making sure we own up to what it is that we're making. And that's making sure that it's ready for the users and anybody else who is planning on uh, accessing our product. So making sure there's testing, clear documentation of what is like each step of the process, and mechanisms for if something goes wrong. In doing so, we can help to build like a more better framework. Next slide. And so to put these principles into practice, I wanted to take a quick pause and just think about like the type of questions we could ask if we are presented with a situation that we may deem as more on the dubious side of ethics. And so like some of these questions would be who is affected, and so that's who has like some skin in the game or their stake or has like certain stakes within it. So that'd be like the users, the society at large, our own colleagues, the company, or even like the greater environment itself, like our own planet. What would be the risks and benefits? And so this would be also pertaining to who is affected. So like what is the harm that may come from this decision or product that we were creating, and what would be the potential good of the product? And then does this align with our own principles? Does this like refer back to our own like privacy and fairness and transparency and accountability principles that we were just speaking on? And then uh, would you be comfortable explaining this to the public? Like if you were to like walk down the street and just speak with a random bystander and talk about what it is that you were making, would you be comfortable explaining the processes and how like it is going to affect others and such like that? And would they be comfortable? And finally, like, is there any other way to achieve this goal without as much harm and like less risk, and maybe seeing about more beneficial outcome? And so, uh, next slide. I wanted to uh, apply the framework. And so I wanted to present a scenario in which we could ask these questions and apply these principles. So let's say that you're working at a company and you're launching a new smart doorbell, and your product manager is like, he wanted to add a new social or a new feature called social scoring. And so the doorbell will use facial recognition to identify neighbors, and then using an algorithm will assign them a trustworthiness score based off of how often they appear throughout the day and what time of day they appear. And this score would be visible to the homeowner, and this would just be seen by as a unique safety feature. And so I wanted to take a little bit of time and just think and uh, maybe text in the chat or say what kind of ethical red flags seem apparent within this product and such like that. And it's just a little on the nose a bit with the issue at hand, but mm, yeah, there'd be a decent break in privacy, it seems. But yeah, so going through the questions, like who would be affected? Obvious one would be the homeowner, because they'd have this feeling of safety and be a little bit of ambiguity and maybe potentially misleading them. And then there'd be neighbors, which would be having their own privacy violated and then being judged without their own consent. And then there'd also be the company, which may have liability or reputational risk at hand due to uh, companies may not want to be known as like a bit of like a big brother watching over others. And what are the risks? Uh, Mass surveillance. There's false positives, like someone may be misidentified and seen like not as a friend, and then reinforcing prejudice, or even just creating a hostile environment in general. Uh, and then does this align with principles? Privacy has been violated. Fairness is the algorithm developed itself is unfair, and there's no transparency involved. And then the test of would you be able to speak about this in public? Uh, it's not very. It wouldn't be very nice to speak about in public. And then an alternative would be maybe a privacy-focused familiar face feature that identifies known context when given their own consent to be like known. And so this example is quite on the nose and quite easily, while in like day-to-day life, it will be more gray and less black and white with the issues at hand. And in doing so, it's important to be thinking more critically on the issue and making sure we're applying our own principles and are asking just deep questions that can help to divvy out how it's easy to identify problems in our own business like workplace. So instead of just being like, I don't feel comfortable, you can relate back to these principles and give clear examples of what is the issue at hand. Next slide. And so in conclusion, ethics is a practice, not a document. And so it's not just something that we sign, it's something that you need to think about on a day-to-day basis, either in your real life or when you're working and such like that. And so it requires day-to-day thought and like working on that like it's a muscle, as so you make sure to exercise it and make sure in your own environment it's important to speak up whenever there's a uh, dubious like topic that's provided like in the business workplace and such like that, and making sure that um, we're building things that are not just like to get to the end goal, but also to be fair and accountable and worthy for the users themselves so that they can trust our own product. Uh, and so, uh, thank you. That's the end of my topic. If
Thank-
there's any questions, oh,
No, I mean, if there's any questions, but if not, I have slides on my local as well that I'd like to present. Let's see. Okay, everybody can see?
Oh, yep, you're good.
Yeah,
Sweet. Okay, so obviously, we're all going to be going into or hope to be going into some sort of computer science background and into the field in computer science, but also we have to go into a professional environment, right? Um, so to leave us off, I would like to take a look at the ACM Code of Ethics and how we can apply them. So let's see. Okay, so who is ACM? ACM is the Association for Computing Machinery, and they are a professional organization designed by and for people in the computing and tech fields. What do? They set ethical standards, they publish research, and support professionals and students in their field. They hold conferences, they have publications, um, all centered around uh, you know, knowledge transfer in the field as well as these ethical standards. And so they have written the ACM Code of Ethics, which is considered to be the gold standard in computer science ethics. And in general, what these ethics does, its code of ethics does, is it defines what it means to be an ethical developer or an ethical engineer. Um, so we're going to just take a look at some of the larger bullet points of the code framework here and see what they talk about. So as a first general umbrella, we have the general ethical principles. Um, so one, contribute to society and to human well-being, acknowledging that all people are stakeholders in computing. Two, avoid harm. Three, be honest and trustworthy. Four, be fair and take action not to discriminate. Five, respect the work required to produce new ideas, inventions, creative works, and computing artifacts. Six, respect privacy. And seven, honor confidentiality. For me personally, the few of these that stand out the most are the ones that are the simplest. Um, and they're simple because they are it's self-evident, and I think that they're stronger and they get their point across a little bit better than being simple. So like the one that stands out the most to me is this one here, avoid harm. And what we mean by harm is we mean having sort of negative consequences, whether they be uh, physical consequences or mental consequences, perhaps damage to property or reputation or the environment. Um, we could say that going back to Charles' example with Volkswagen and their decision to write code to skirt around how their emissions were tracked, we would say that that is not avoiding harm. In fact, that is kind of actively seeking harm. So as professionals and as developers, we want to make sure that we are avoiding harm at all costs. And then probably the next one is be honest and trustworthy, right? Making sure that we aren't misrepresenting our procedures on how we work or how we generate code or how we gain data. We don't misrepresent the security of the data that we are processing and perhaps holding on to. And then the last one that I think is the most important of all these is this one here: respect privacy. Uh, Obviously, in a computer science background, the privacy concerns of user data is a constant thing that comes up. Um, and respecting privacy isn't just about, okay, well, I am processing and doing things with user data and I should be respectful of it because it's personal data. Uh, I can be respectful of a person's privacy, sure, in like a personal sense, but if my systems aren't secured, if I'm not encrypting data, if I'm not, uh, storing it in secure databases, then that is not a respecting of privacy. It is a mistreatment of data and a mistreatment of privacies for your users. So those are my three big ones to take out here. Obviously, they're all important. Avoid harm, be honest and trustworthy, respect privacy. Any questions before I move on? Okay. Then we have some professional responsibilities. So this is professional ethics. So here was last slide was some general ethical overviews, but what does it mean to be a good professional in terms of ethics? So we should strive to achieve high quality in both the process and products of professional work, maintain high standards of professional competence, conduct, and ethical practice, know and respect existing rules pertaining to professional work, accept and provide appropriate professional review, give comprehensive and thorough evaluations of computer systems and their impacts, including analysis of possible risk, perform work only in areas of competence, foster public awareness and understanding of computing, related technologies and their consequences, access computing and communication resources only when authorized or when compelled by the public good, and design and implement systems that are robustly and usably secure. So now we get some kind of ideas as to what it means to be a good professional, really just in perhaps in any field that you're in. Again, kind of want to point out some ones that I think that stood out to me. I really like this one here, 2.6, perform work only in areas of competence. It is your ethical and professional responsibility to make sure that you are honest about your areas of expertise. I can't go and watch a 2-hour YouTube video about cybersecurity and then call myself a cybersecurity expert and then also take on clients to do cybersecurity for. And that would not be a ethical practice of me. It's not an area of competence. I only have a very basic level of things, and I should not be the one that's handling that work. So it would be my ethical obligation to turn down that work. Another one that's also important here, 2.4, accept and provide appropriate professional review. I really like this one. In fact, I do this quite a bit at my current position, current job, making sure that myself and other developers sit down and have code reviews often and frequently to make sure that we are writing good, safe, secure code that functions properly. It is a professional responsibility to make sure that your work and your coworkers' works is also very good. And then a last one here is kind of similar to 4, is 5, comprehensive and thorough evaluations of computer systems and their impacts, including analysis of possible risk. Doing frequent audits of systems, not only the systems that you use, but also audits of the systems that perhaps are linked with the work that you do, and making sure that there are no security risks inside of your work. Okay, any questions? All right, we have one last section. We have some professional leadership principles. So the work that you do is not isolated to just you, and being a leader, not only even as a boss, but even as like a low-level employee, you can have some leadership principles that we want to follow. So ensure that the public good is the central concern during all professional computing work. Articulate, encourage acceptance of, and evaluate fulfillment of social responsibilities by members of the organization or group, manage personnel and resources to enhance the quality of working life, articulate, apply, and support policies and processes that reflect the principles of the code, create opportunities for members of the organization or group to grow as professionals, use care when modifying or retiring systems, and recognize and take special care of systems that become integrated into the infrastructure of society. So for the last time, I like to look at just the three that pop out to me. Here, this 3.6, use care when modifying or retiring systems. If we are perhaps retiring some legacy system that we, let's say I run some sort of database and I'm going to be modifying this database. It's a ethical responsibility of me to make sure that I publish some sort of change log or updates so that my customers can read that and understand how it could possibly affect their systems. Or if I'm retiring my system altogether, I need to let everyone know that, hey, you will no longer receive support for the service. You can continue to use it, but you're not going to receive any support for it. Recognize and take special care of systems that become integrated into infrastructure of society. Talking about the Maui wildfires, right? That was an example of a system that was absolutely integrated into society, right? It's a public health and a public safety system that was not designed for the health and safety of the public. It only reached, it only was able to effectively reach English speakers, and it was a lack of sight on the developers to not consider the whole of society, right? So whenever we're integrating our systems in society, we need to think about it in a holistic sense. And then finally, I like 3.5 here, create opportunities for members of the organizations to grow as professionals, making sure that you and your team have the opportunities to grow in your field, be able to go and take certification courses or continue learning so that you can continue to stay updated and be the best developer that you can be, which is to say that you are a safe and responsible developer. And that is it. So using these three principles here, the general ethical principles, the professional responsibilities, and the professional leadership principles, keeping all of these things in mind, can allow you and your team to be good followers of professional ethics. And that is all I have. If anybody has any questions.
Oh, thank you, Blake. I really appreciate you actually expressing an opinion, which is what the course is about in many respects, and kind of reasoning through,
Thank you.
as you pointed out, these inherently not ambiguous, but you know, these issues with in practice rarely have clear-cut decisions. All right. Well, with that, we are just on time, and want to thank everyone, and have a nice evening. And we'll be back here in a week. Enjoy the holiday.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thanks, guys.